Welcome to this installment of our mental health program. Today I'm joined by Corby Petersen. He's a licensed clinical social worker and has helped me personally with some of my turbulent times in 2015 and 2016. Corby, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
So in this segment, I sort of wanted to get into a little bit of maybe more of the individualistic mental health awareness and education.
Okay.
We've had some great guests help us with child psychology, maybe new parents. We have another doctor. She's been tremendous help with maybe the older population. Not that this won't, help all of those populations, but more, middle-aged individual, not so much focused on the other topics.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, in 2015, 2016, I became depressed, and I didn't know it at the time. I thought maybe I was just having some consecutive bad days. I was low energy.
Mm-hmm.
I would come home from work and go straight to sleep for 12 hours, I thought, just having a rough time. With your professional opinion and expertise, what can someone see within themselves or whatnot for some signs and symptoms of depression, depressive disorder, or symptoms rather, and just having a rough patch?
That's a good question. Actually, I came prepared with a little bit.
Awesome.
And I don't know if you can see this, but there's a thing called SIGI caps.
Okay.
And I learned that when I was in the Air Force, and we were doing a lot of evaluation. And I was working in an environment where nuclear weapons are around, and so we had to evaluate whether they were good to go or not. And so I learned the SIGI caps, which is an acronym that stands for these things: the sleep, interest, guilt, energy, concentration, appetite, psychomotor agitation, and suicide.
And we'll definitely put this stuff up as bullet points for you guys at home. Awesome.
Yeah. So basically, it was when I would evaluate, I would run down this acronym and ask questions related to them, and that basically screened them for depression. And I want to say, first of all, when depression becomes clinical, like you became, at first it's normal, or it's usual that people will, not think of themselves as depressed, because
totally.
Nobody wants to think that,
That was me.
And it's attached to our ego and everything else. But mostly, the thought is scary, to have this depression, especially if it's the first time. And, we all have an image of what we think a depressed person looks like, or any mental illness, what it looks like, and we don't see that in ourselves. So, am I depressed? But I think that when it becomes clinical enough to the point to where you should seek treatment, seek some help, then it becomes physical.
Yep.
And so that's why these symptoms, I think, are significant. Is you mentioned a couple of symptoms right away: the sleep, and clearly, and it can go either too much or too little. So the thing about depression is some of the symptoms are a lot of one thing or too little of another, and sleep is one of those. So if you're basically having trouble sleeping, it could be due to anxiety, lots of things, but of course, when you have a sleep disturbance, and it's usually typified by difficulty getting to sleep, or not being able to sleep, tossing and turning for a long time, or it could be like you did. You'd come home and just sleep for long periods of time, and that's very typical.
And I'm a sleeper, but I was 3 hours above my norm.
Yeah.
And it was pretty immediate,
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. My wife was like, what's going on here? Something's different.
Well, and there's probably other things you could point to, some of these symptoms. So the interest is that symptom is difficult to kind of identify, but really it really talks about how your ability to experience pleasure is diminished. And so one of the words that we use is anhedonia, which is hedonism, of course related to that, inability to experience pleasure. And so that's when you just don't feel like doing anything.
You know, I'll tell you, personal experience, it was a Saturday night. It was, you know, my wife was pregnant. I just started a new job. Things were good. The summer's coming in Alaska. It was about 6 p.m., right? That's our night. My wife and I, we usually do something. I honestly just wanted to go to bed. And anyone that knows me, you know, I enjoy my free time. Something was off. That was it.
You know, I like the way that you said that, because I think one of the important things to do when you're asking yourself the question, is this a problem? You know, is this normal? That is a good question to ask yourself. You know, to be able to say to yourself, well, I'm just feeling off.
Yeah.
And it might not be big. And so you can have depression and it not be very big, but it can still affect your life. And the interest is one way that it's going to show up. The G relates to guilt. And so when you have depression, there gets what I call a depression filter. And so your perceptions become dark and negative. And so the guilt is really a reflection of how you see yourself, in terms of you're only noticing the bad things that you do or think you do, and you'll feel guilty more often. But it can also be reflected in just having negative thoughts in general. So I'll give an example. I suffer from depression as well. And sometimes when I'm with my wife and say we're going to the store and we'll be just browsing, and I might not be thrilled about being there, and then I'll just be talking negative in general. And my wife will notice and she'll go, Corby, you're being really negative. And that's a clue, you know, for me, that my depression filters become very dark. And so when you're depressed, is you have that depression filter, and so only negative comes through, and it's almost as if you have these mirror sunglasses on, and anything positive bounces off.
That's great.
And that's what I usually describe to people. So,
okay.
But it's important to know that, because that doesn't mean you've become a negative person. It just means in your depressed state, that's how your brain's working.
You're sort of having these signs.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a brain state.
Yeah.
And just like anxiety is that it tends to color how you see things. But that's a good sign. So if you notice that you're just having a lot of negativity and you're feeling a lot of guilt, then maybe,
Okay.
you know, that's worth asking that question.
Okay.
The one next to that, the E, represents energy. And you said it yourself, so all I wanted to do was go to bed. So not only were you tired, you wanted to go to bed.
And more specifically with activities that I typically love to do.
Yeah.
Hiking or hanging out with friends, or, you know, stuff that really doesn't take a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Had no interest.
Right.
Yeah.
And so not only the interest goes down, but the oomph, the energy,
100%.
the feeling like doing it.
Right.
You know, and even your strength and your abilities are compromised at that point. So the C is concentration, and that, I mean, it may be obvious, but when you're depressed, you're not thinking right. And that's reflected in the interest and the guilt as well. But your concentration can become impaired. So that can affect not only your concentration, but also your memory, as well as other cognitive functioning, you know, judgment. All that stuff becomes compromised.
To touch on that acronym, I would read something in the morning. A couple hours later, it would sort of pass my mind. I'd have to go back and read it. Where typically, once I've read it, you know, visually I've got it. Not so much during that time.
Yeah.
So,
I appreciate you bringing this personal in because,
Of course.
number one, I'm assuming that this is good for your audience because you're a healthy guy. You're doing well. You're an amazing guy. And yet you've had depression.
And I appreciate that. And it's an ongoing thing that once you understand it, it's a lot easier to manage.
Absolutely.
But when you're in denial or just unawareness, that's a scary place to be.
Yeah, it is.
I think with the audience, just getting them on board to understanding what it is and pointing them in the right direction,
Yeah.
So, no, yeah, sure.
You're absolutely right. And a big part of depression management is being aware of the symptoms and when they show up and knowing what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when you go to counseling, a good measure of what I do with people with depression is I prepare them. I hope that they get better, and I assume that they will. But in the event, depression can come, and then and I'm not wishing to scare anybody, but when you've been depressed, you're much more likely to get depressed again in the future. It becomes the brain is an anticipation machine. It's a known pathway.
You can ruminate on it, but hopefully with some tools, you can manage it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I know that personally.
Yeah.
That if I notice that I'm starting to feel some of these things, then I know I can tell myself, well, that's depression talk, and that's kind of what I say.
Yeah.
It's either anxiety talk and or it's depression
Yeah.
talk. So it's the state of my mind, what I'm seeing the world through. And in that state, I can train myself to do something different and something that's helpful. And that's part of what you learn in counseling is these skills. I want to add the appetite. So did you have problems with your appetite?
I don't think so. That was one symptom. Not really.
It could be too much. Did you gain weight?
I blamed it on my child.
Okay.
Yes, I did. I gained weight just a few weeks after my first was born. It was pretty immediate. And, probably lack of sleep and this, but
yeah, that's
sure.
one of those symptoms that can go either way.
Yeah.
Because when I first got depressed, when I was experiencing my major depressive episode, my appetite went way down. In fact, the only thing I enjoyed, forgive me for saying this, but McDonald's hamburgers, the only thing that tasted good.
Pretty
to
good.
Me. Yeah. Maybe a combination of salt and fat.
Okay.
And so I ate a lot of McDonald's hamburgers. But after I got treated and I was feeling better, then it went the other way. And then I gained weight.
Me too.
So
Me too.
So that can happen. And so that's important to understand. So again, that's not about willpower. It's what your body is doing. And that psychomotor agitation stands for body movements. So, for example, I have a tendency when I get nervous to shake my leg. And the psychiatrists call that psychomotor agitation, and it's a symptom. But in depression, that's another one of those symptoms that can go either way. So, for example, there's been times when I've been depressed when I've become more clumsy. When I'm doing woodwork, then I'm dropping things and I'm having a difficult time with my fine motor. Sometimes that's my depression.
Well, wow.
Okay. And other times I just can't sit still.
So it could go either way.
It can go either way.
Okay.
Much like the energy and the concentration and the sleep. So,
okay.
And the suicide, of course, is an obvious one is suicidal thoughts. But it doesn't have to be suicidal. It could just be, and I say just, I don't mean to minimize it. It could be as simple as just thinking about death. And people will tell me, there's a lot of ways that I hear people talk about it. And usually it's, I'm tired, I just don't want to do this anymore. It'd be okay with me if I didn't wake up. And it's not that they're suicidal, it's just they're tired of what they're experiencing. And I call it escape fantasies, where you just want this to end. I don't want to feel this anymore.
Totally.
And so, I tell that to people because, you know, the thoughts you're having suicide can be pretty scary. And if it scares you, that's a good sign. So that's a sign where definitely you need to seek some help.
Well, you know, this information is amazing. You know, folks don't need to necessarily have all of these.
No.
But you start clumping things together, it's sort of telling you, talk to your doctor.
Absolutely.
Seek professional assistance, see a mental health professional.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and a doctor is a good way to go because they can prescribe medicine if that's warranted. Or they can refer you
to the appropriate person.
Yeah, yeah.
And with the way medicine is shifting, there are a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers that are available telehealth now.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
I've
And
seen
you
lots
can
of
live in
ads.
the middle of nowhere. And a lot of them, Dr. Stockman was letting me know the sliding scale. So where you can seek some guidance with, you know, discounted rate for cash and all that stuff. I'm not totally aware of that, but
Yeah.
it's out there, right?
Yeah, that's
You
for
can-
sure.
You can find it.
Well, and I want to say that when it comes to depression, we often refer to it as the common cold of the mental health world.
Yeah.
It's very common, you know, and literally anyone can become depressed.
What's a good, reputable source on the internet or, you know, in a book, old school book, that folks can research and look at that you would say, yeah, I would trust that resource to look at symptoms and treatment and, you know, various things?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I mean, there's lots of them out there.
I typically have my folks go to National Institutes of Health, Mayo Clinic,
Yeah.
you know, big hospital organizations to at least get some information instead of just saying, what is depression on the Google search. You know, I think that gets dangerous because then you just get flooded with ads and different things.
You're absolutely right in terms of those websites that you mentioned, those bigger ones, especially the National Institute of Health and SAMHSA, stuff like that.
Yep.
So those are reputable services. You're going to get the same kinds of information, but it's going to be reliable information.
Yeah.